Today's drama started way before the actual round started, with Team China deciding to bench the world champion Ding Liren in what would have been the very highly anticipated encounter between Gukesh and Ding, a preview of the world championship match, but it didn't happen. We will still have to wait. The whole world of chess still has to wait until November for these two players to play against each other, and it was Wei Yi that was slated to face Ding on board one in the big clash between India and China. And let's take a look at what happened. First of all, the three games all the way from board 2 to board 4 finished in draws, and they finished in draws in a matter of 3 to 4 hours. And it was all on the shoulders of Gukesh or Wei Yi to try to score a crucial victory for their respective countries to be able to give India or China the victory. And let's see what happened, because it was absolutely wild. Gukesh starts with e4, c5, already quite a reaction by Wei Yi. Knight f3, d6, knight to c3, and this is very much aimed against the Najdorf. For example, if you go d4, I just simply take, knight f6, and knight to c3. You can play the move a6. You're not forced to more or less play the move knight to c6. Knight to c3, knight to f6, and now bishop to e2. Obviously, if you continue with d4, the same thing would happen. Black would play a6. Wei Yi, being a Najdorf player, he was definitely not afraid of that. So Gukesh seems to have been very much in direction of, I need to get him out of his opening preparation. Or perhaps he just prepared against Ding more than he prepared for Wei Yi. And my guess is that he just simply did not have enough time before the round to actually prepare thoroughly against the Najdorf. It's so difficult to find an advantage, and it does seem like Gukesh decided that he would just simply wanted to play a game of chess, forget about theory, and just try to squeeze an advantage out of the opening with pure chess. Bishop to e2, e5. This is the problem with playing the move bishop to e2. You're basically allowing e5, and that's going to block you from playing d4 for the remainder of the game. Bishop to c4, and this is a very, very strange way of playing this particular line. And if you look at this one, after, for example, knight to c3, if black plays the move e5, which is a very much an option, I can just simply go bishop to c4, knight to f6, d3, and we basically have the same position, but with a tempo up for white. What Gukesh decides to do is bishop to e2, e5, and bishop to c4, losing a crucial tempo. Bishop to e7, you want to meet knight g5, pressuring f7 with immediate castle. d3, knight to c6, and bishop to g5. Now, what he's trying to do, what Gukesh is trying to do, is eliminate the knight on f6, which will give him access to the d5 square. Castle, bishop takes f6, not even waiting for black to play the move h6, bishop takes f6, and knight to d5. Bishop to e6, immediately challenging the knight on d5, queen to d2, a6, looking at intimidating that bishop on c4 with b5. And he's trying, Wei Yi, right now, to get some sort of counterplay, some sort of dynamic counterplay, because from a positional perspective, it is white that is having the easier time for the moment, especially because of this beautiful square d5. Castle, b5, bishop to b3, king to h8, and this position already looks like some sort of a Sveshnikov situation, where black is just simply going to try to go g6, bishop to g7, save the bishop before white can take on f6, and then play the move f5. Open up the position, you have the two bishops as black. What you need to do is find the dynamic play in this certain situation. a3, a rook to b8, h3, g6, as I've mentioned, preparing the move bishop to g7. And at this point, I mean, Wei Yi, he was flowing. It just simply felt like he was in the mood, he was in the zone. Obviously, Wei has been having a tremendous year so far, and it didn't seem like Gukesh has gotten anything out of the opening. To be honest, in my estimation and in my eyes, and I was chatting with Peter as well during our commentary, if White does not take on f6 right now, and accepts the fact that most likely there's not going to be an opening advantage, the position seems to be liquidating quite quickly, I'm going to be able to challenge you on the light squares. You don't actually have an advantage anymore as White. It is that, or as we've seen in the game, the move c3 and try to break in the center and keep the knight on d5, but this opens up the possibility for black to actually get some serious play after bishop to g7. Bishop g7, f5, and with the two bishops, it's going to be quite difficult to deal with black's initiative on the king side. Bishop to a2, defending directly and indirectly this bishop to this bishop on a2, f5, knight to g5, bishop to g8, take on f5, take on f5, and it's becoming apparent that only black can play for a win right now. At least only black can play for an advantage right now. The position still remains very complex, so obviously anything can happen. It's a 3-result game, but it is black who has the advantage, and I do think that both of the players understood that, because as you can see also from the time expenditure right now, Gukesh was struggling. He was falling behind on the clock. f4, perhaps a good move to try to eliminate the potential of an attack for black with the move f4, or maybe even e4, breaking the center like this and basically just trying to kill you on the king side, trying to get to your king. f4, I like this move by Gukesh. c4, a very good move by Wei at the same time. Take on c4, take on c4, bishop takes c4, accepting the sacrifice. And at this point, he missed a golden opportunity. He played a very bad move, Wei, that I don't want to say lost him the game, because it didn't. But after knight to a5, this would have been a much better position for him. Knight to a5, you have to go back to a2 to keep contact with the knight on d5. Now I'm going to continue with knight to b3. I'm going to eliminate your bishop. Now you have problems. Your knight is no longer very safe on d5. It doesn't have the defense of the bishop, it only has the defense of the queen, and that's not going to be saying much. And after, for example, first of all, I still have a lot of pressure on the b file. If you try to go something like knight to b4, then I can just continue with the move e4. And look at your knights. h6 is coming, you're losing a knight. You have to defend against that with h4. h6 still comes, you have to drop back. And now look at how disconnected your pieces are. I can go queen to b6, for example, give you a check, increase the pressure on the b file, king to h2, a5, everything just simply flows. My bishops are absolutely spectacular on these two diagonals. I'm going to pick up the b2 pawn. That's going to soften up the c3 pawn. This is looking ugly for White. But he took on f4. Absolutely terrible decision from a practical perspective, from an objective perspective. But also it's inexplicable, because after knight f3, everything is more or less safe. This bishop is not really as good, and you could have opened it up by playing the move e4. Now finally the knight gets back into play. Instead of you having the knight locked on that side with the move e4, now the knight is completely back. Your structure is atrocious, and I still am a pretty healthy pawn, not up, but I have a nice majority on the queen side as White. You have to deal with that, and you have to do it fast. Knight to a5, bishop to a2, knight to b3, bishop takes b3, rook takes b3, and once again, at this point, it was White, it was Gukesh that has a tremendous chance to continue having the advantage with the move rook to f2, but he didn't play that. He played knight takes f4, queen to b6, rook to f2. And right now I can just simply go rook to b8, and there's no way for you to defend the pawn on b2. If you try to do so with rook to b1, bishop takes c3 comes, taking advantage of this spin, and you're in fact in big danger. He played rook to d1, but now we have simplifications. Take, not take, sorry, a5, but I will take on c3. Next move. Rook to d8, take, knight to d5, rook to b1, and we basically got into this position, taking on g8, king takes g8, and knight takes c3. Now we have this transition, which was forced, by the way, into two knights versus a rook, with pawns on both sides. Rook to c1, perhaps not the best move. In fact, I'm not really sure why he did not play the move rook to a1. For example, if you continue with a4 right now, I can just simply go rook to a3 and you're losing the pawn. So that's not the way to defend that pawn. You have to go knight to b5. And now I can give you a check. That forces you to stay close to your pawn. Let's say you try to go with king to g3. Now I can eliminate another pawn, or at least force you to hide your king to h2, which is a very passive square for the king. And if you do so, then I can continue with a rook to b2. You go knight to d4, already in trouble, because now the knight is overloaded. If you take on f3, obviously, you lose the other knight on b5. So this would have been the much better option for black. Instead, he played the move rook to c1, knight to b5, rook to c2, king to f1, king f7. Black is trying to get the king towards the center, towards potentially the queen side, try tackle up this pawn on a3. Knight to d4, king to f6, and it felt at this point like the players are about to agree to a draw, because I didn't see, and I was talking with everybody else as well, and nobody saw a way forward for white. Rook to b3, a4. Simply put, white can coordinate the knights in a very nice manner, but it's only a defensive stance. You're going to have to defend this pawn on a4. If black manages to exchange these two pawns, then the position is going to be an easy draw. King to e5, g3, rook to b6, a lot of shuffling ensues. King to e3, we shuffle, but it was still Gukesh that was trying to find something, trying to find an invasion in the position, a setup that would work in his favor. Knight to d4, and I like the setup with the pawn on g3, because now you no longer have the extra weakness on the king side. Once I go rook to g8, for example, tackle that, I can just simply defend that weakness with the knight. Rook to d8, king to e3, rook to c8, king to d3, rook to d8, proposing a draw, basically. Knight to e2, rook to b8, getting out, by the way, with the move knight to e2, getting out of this repetition. Knight to f4, rook to b1, knight to d5, and knight to c3. Rook to h1, and by the way, Wei really drilled down the best moves in this sequence. Knight to f3, king to d6, h4, rook to h3, pressuring on g3, forcing the reaction with knight to e2, f4. And this is the key that Wei more or less understood should give him the best chances to make a draw and keep the position tight, keep the position balanced, which it did. This is still completely objectively equal. Knight to g1, rook to h1, g takes f4, rook takes h4, knight to f3, rook to h1, and f5. And at this point, things are becoming a little bit difficult, in fact, for black, because it's became a race. I have this extra pawn. You have the h-pawn, obviously, beautiful pawn, but I'm faster. White is faster. h5, already a bad move in this position. Rook to a1 seems to have been the best path forward. Still, the position, it became very complicated. And after h5, knight to c3, perhaps a missed opportunity. Knight to g3 was slightly better in the position, for the simple fact that I'm going to go knight to e4 next. And that's going to force a reaction with the rook. That's not going to allow you an extra tempo to push the pawn, as it did in the game. So knight to c3, h4, knight to e4 check, king to d7, by the way, best move in the position. Everything else loses, because if you go to e7, I'm getting in. I'm getting in with a check, then I'm getting the knight either to e5 or g5. I'm one move faster, so you need to keep the king away from the checks, which he did. King to d7, knight to e5, king to d8, still perfect to this position. Still perfect. King to d8, f6, h3. And this was a big mistake. What he had to do in this position was, in fact, go behind the pawn as fast as possible, or rook to d1 in this one. This was the key move. Rook to d1. Try to get the king either on the e or the c file. If you go on the c file, then you're simply going to be too far away. And if you go to e3, rook to f1 would even the score. h3 was a terrible move. f7, because right now it's only a very narrow path that allows black to stay in the game. Rook to f1, good start. Knight to g5, h2, good continuation. Knight to g3, and a huge mistake is just about, the critical mistake is just about to arrive on the board. If you want to test yourself, well, to be honest, it's not even such a big test. If you make the move that was played in the game, you lose instantaneously. If you don't, then you don't. And the only move would have been rook to d1 check. Give a check first, let's say king to c4, and then you have to accept h1, f8, this type of position, which is very difficult to understand that you're not getting checkmated, because the queen and the knight are doing a tremendous job. And guess what? There's another one coming via d4. Very difficult position already. It's not losing. Black is still in this game. It would have been difficult for Gukesh to win, surely, but it would have been even more difficult for Wei, in fact, to make a draw with a minute on the clock. At this point, he had a minute on the clock. He was playing on increment. In fact, both players were playing on increment. He played king e7, which is the final mistake, the nail in the coffin, because once you give me this h2 pawn, the game is pretty much over. Knight takes h2, rook to a1, trying to go for the a4 pawn, but it's too late. And in fact, only with one move, and Gukesh finds it with 5 seconds on his clock. Knight to g4. The idea being that you need to get the knight to h6 to defend the pawn on f7 and then give the check from g6. That will help with the promotion. And you simply cannot defend against that. You cannot stop me from doing that while at the same time picking up the a4 pawn. Otherwise, if you don't pick up the a4 pawn, you're busted. Rook to a3, and another crucial move, and the only move in the position, that is king to d2. If you go to e2, for example, this is problematic, because now I'm just simply going to be able to take on a4, and this is a completely different approach. You go knight to h6, obviously I have rook to e4, and this is pretty much all she wrote. But on the other side, it is black who's winning this game right now because of rook takes c5. So king to d2, you have to stay on d2. Rook takes a4, knight to h6. You cannot touch this f4 square. You would love to go behind the pawn, but knight to g6, not only that it supports the push of the pawn, but also picks up the rook on f4. So he played rook to a2, king to e3, rook to a3, and one last moment in which he could have gone wrong was king to f4 if he would have played that, because after king to f4, I can go rook to a1. Of course, you can go back, and in fact, it's still winning. But right now, after knight to g6, for example, king to d7, f8, I go rook to f1, I pick up the queen, and this is just a draw. This is a technical draw. So king to e4, the final move. He resigned because right now the difference is I'm going to give you a check. You're going to go on the f file, but once you give the check and you promote, you have the extra option of defending against the check with knight to f4, which finishes the game. Guys, absolutely impressive performance by Gukesh D against Wei, the replacement for Ding Liren. Ding Liren was benched. There's not much else to say. A big decision by Team China. I don't know how they got to that decision. Obviously, it could have been that Ding was, look, I just lost against Le Quang with the white pieces. I'm not really feeling in the mood to defend with the black pieces against Gukesh, and I don't want to give him any sort of advantage leading up to the World Championship match. So this could have been the consideration when they made the huge decision to bench him. They did. It didn't work in their favor. It could have. They were very close to equalizing the match, keeping the match tight with 4 draws. It didn't happen. Gukesh D wins this one. Team India right now on a perfect score. Absolutely incredible chess so far. They're unstoppable. Who's going to stop them? Maybe the United States. Tomorrow they're fighting Iran. We'll see what happens tomorrow. For the moment, it's time for me to get some dinner. See you guys soon. Bye. Cheers.